Ayo, now you can hear us.
Okay, let us know. Okay, yeah, Sabrina says the same thing. I see you, no sound.
Okay.
As soon as you can hear us, let us know if you can.
I
So
think I can just quit this and then not hurt anything because we're just broadcasting through here.
Well, now it's frozen.
Oh, no, we can't.
Shoot.
Technical difficulties. All right. Now you're good, babe.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone should be able to hear and see us now.
Okay.
We had to change how we did the stream. Let's make sure.
Okay. Janine, but you look fabulous. Is there a way to put the icon dot online at the forefront instead of?
I can try. Hold on.
Okay. Bear with us, y'all. We're getting this situated. We see the same setup that we use for church. Dan also, Sabrina says she can't see Dan. That's on purpose. He's out of the shot at the moment on purpose. But this is the same setup that Dan uses for his job. So like there's a lot of switching around of cameras and things that has to happen. And because we don't do this every week anymore, sometimes it just is a little tricky.
I'm going to try
trying one last thing.
Oops. Oh, I think I know why.
Amanda said we're nothing but professional.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Well, so here's the deal. It's a little trickier than I would like.
That's okay. We don't have to put them up if it's not going to work.
We'll give it one more shot. Because you see, Apple likes to save photos in file formats that aren't as friendly. We're going to take a stab here.
Darn you, Apple.
Yeah, I'd just say let's take a hard pass on this. I can figure it out later.
We're taking a hard pass on photos, but listen, Amanda said, did you try turning it off and turning it back on again? We actually kind of did on accident a little bit with Restream, but okay.
This'll work.
Well, you know what? You guys are so great. Thank you for being so patient. But listen, if you are interested in seeing the photos of us dressed up for Halloween,
this is another way to do it. We have to go to the right camera though.
Okay. I mean,
well, no, it doesn't work at all
very well
because it's green screening it.
But you can go to my Facebook or my Instagram to see the fantastic photos of. Or you don't want to go get coffee real quick? Go ahead. I can chat with people until you get back.
Well, you chat with them.
All right. But anyway, Dan was a rock star and I was his groupie for Halloween and it was fantastic. And I highly encourage you, if you have not seen the picture, you can also text me and I can text you a picture because Dan was like, his costume was like fantastic. It was really, really hilarious. And so the pants that he wore, I got them at Hot Topic and the tag literally said, seriously tight. That was like the description of the pants. And I was like, perfect. So anyway, it was loads of fun. We had a great time with our kiddos, trick-or-treating and dressing up. And the neighborhood we went in, like they go all out. There were people like grilling hot dogs and passing them out. They were giving adults like Jello shots and White Claws. And like, it was, people built like haunted houses in their garages and it was just really fun. So I hope that all of you guys have had a great past week. It's great to be here online with all of you. Amanda sent the pic. Amanda, you're amazing. Thank you for that. Oh, gosh. And of course, the dog. You know, I don't know why I ever expect any different on a Sunday morning. There's always going to be technical difficulties. There's always going to be an annoying dog in the background barking that really high-pitched bark that like seriously makes my skin crawl when she barks because it's so high pitched, it like hurts my brain. But anyways, I mean, you know, it's just, it is what it is around here. So this morning, actually, originally, I was going to prepare like a whole sermon And then it has been a week. Our 7-year-old has been sick off and on for like about a month. And then this week he ended up getting testing positive for strep. So he had strep throat all week. And so I was having to take care of him. And so I wasn't hardly sleeping because he kept waking up at night because his throat hurt so bad. And so I was kind of a walking zombie this week. And so preparing a whole sermon just felt really hard. And so Dan was like, well, why don't we just have a conversation? And I was like, that I can do. And I thought it'd be fun because we haven't done that in a little while. And it's always fun to be able to do that. And so, so we're going to start that. Then you had too many Jell-O shots, Stephen said. Oh, you guys are so fun. Okay. So anyway, he went to go get coffee. So when he gets back, we'll go ahead and start into that conversation. But before that, just to go over a couple of things. First of all, if you are new around here and you would like to be able to kind of stay up to date on different things we have going on, if you want to know kind of what each week is looking like for Icon, you can go ahead and fill out a Connect card if you want. And then that basically just signs you up for our weekly email. Another great way to stay informed is to follow us on social media. So on Facebook or Instagram, to follow Icon Church on there. And that way, anytime there's anything coming up that you need to know about, you'll be able to do that. And then also, just wanted to say to everyone who continues to give to Icon, thank you so much for your generosity and for being willing to give of your resources to the mission and the vision of what we have going on around here. And so if you would like to give this morning, you can click on the give button in the chat and you can do so. Okay, good. Dan's coming back, but also the dogs have now left. So Belle was like doing her high-pitched bark. And I was like, it's only, you know, it's only makes sense that she would be doing that. Par for the course. So I'm going to scoot over and we're just going to jump right into things this morning instead of doing worship beforehand, because a lot of times when we do conversations like this, it can tend to go a little bit longer than if it's just like someone preaching a sermon. And so
I mean, sometimes some people are a little long-winded with stuff and like, you know, it can take a little bit to get to the point. So it's probably for the better.
Should we talk about when you're telling a story?
Go ahead. First question. First question. Go ahead.
Okay. Is there any way to see the chat like on the big screen?
Like that?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, cool. Let's hear Dan match the bark squeak. Robin said you had too many Jell-O shots. That's why you need your coffee.
I will neither confirm nor deny
I was
those
telling
allegations.
how people were
at
like
the
passing
place.
out hot dogs and they put the Jell-O shots in these like really big, thick syringe looking like things. That was very clever. I thought that was very clever.
Yeah.
But all right. Janine, strep is the worst. Yes, it really was the worst. He was like bawling because his throat hurt so bad. And when he had to go get the test and they like scrape your throat with that cotton swab, like it was just, it's been a week. It's been a week, people. So, but while Dan is kind of still getting a few things set over here, I'll kind of just give a brief intro to what we're going to talk about today. It's something that I've been thinking about off and on for a while. We titled today, Follow Your Heart. And I think this is a concept, this whole idea of following your heart is something that, especially as of late, I've seen it spark a lot of controversy in Christian spaces. And I think, you know, I know for me that one of the like primary concerns for me growing up, like once I became a teenager and started kind of thinking about what am I going to do with my life and like those kinds of things, it was always this huge, heavy focus on knowing God's will for your life. That was something that was always talked about in the spaces, the religious spaces that I was in as I was growing up. And then even, you know, in my early 20s and when I went to Bible school, it was
a big part of it was like knowing God's will for your life, knowing what God was telling you that you were supposed to do. And I think as I've shifted in my faith over the years, this is a concept that has also shifted for me, the way that I see it, my perspective on it, the way that I understand this idea of God's will and hearing God speak to you, and these things that can feel so kind of ethereal and complicated, and like how, like, oh, so God told you, oh, so did you hear God audibly speak to you? Like, is that how we determine God's will? Or like, is it just this feeling that we have internally of like, oh, I really feel like God is saying to do this, or what does that even look like? And so one of the things, like, as I've shifted in this area, I've noticed that especially lately among folks who have sort of left fundamentalist Christian spaces, who have been on this journey of deconstruction. We've talked about this before. I know a lot of you on today would probably consider yourself familiar with the idea of faith deconstruction. You've probably, a lot of you have probably wrestled with your faith and made a lot of changes and changed your mind on things and made a lot of shifts. But I think for a lot of people, one of those shifts I know that for me was really big was in this idea of what does it look like to trust yourself and like to make decisions in your life as a follower of Jesus. And I think there's been a shift in, I know for me, in like how I view my personhood, how I view my body, how I view kind of like trusting your gut, like those kinds of things. And I've done a lot of reading and studying about this idea of embodiment and like learning to listen to our bodies and to trust what our bodies are saying to us. And we've talked about that a lot here too. And recently I read this blog post that was shared in a Facebook group that I'm a part of. And that's kind of what sparked the idea for today's conversation, because there's a scripture, Jeremiah 17:9, that a lot of you are probably familiar with. I know I heard this scripture over and over and over again throughout my years as a Christian, but it's Jeremiah 17:9. And it's this, it says, the human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So it's this idea that the heart is deceitful and wicked above all things. Like that's kind of the basis of this scripture. And I read this blog post that someone wrote about this scripture. And it captured my attention because this is something that I've heard quoted countless times in sermons and in conversations with other Christians, especially over the past several years. I've seen this verse used as like a gotcha verse that kind of more fundamentalist evangelical Christians will use against people who have deconstructed or who have left fundamentalism. But the writer of this blog proposes a different translation of this passage that, and I'll put a link to the passage in the chat too, because it's very like, they look at context and culture and they cross-reference different scriptures and they break down the Hebrew, and it's kind of a lot. You have to kind of sit with it, but it was very interesting to me. And basically their conclusion at the end of it is that they were acknowledging that they felt a more accurate translation of the scripture was the heart is complex and fragile. Who can know it? So as opposed to it being this thing where like our heart is like deceitful and wicked. And so how can you trust anything that you think because your heart is so deceitful and wicked? And so I wanted to have this conversation today, just because I know this is something for me that I even still think about as a follower of Jesus, of like, okay, how do I, when I'm making big decisions or when I'm trying to discern, what I believe, where the Spirit is leading, like, what does that look like, especially as your faith has shifted? And so I just thought we could have a conversation about that today. So that's my intro. And so I just jotted down some questions and that we're going to just talk about. And so, Sabrina said, yep, that's why I was told I couldn't trust my feelings that I was queer. Okay. Yep. Whew. Okay. That's so good. And also for all of you, please feel free to comment and share your perspective in the chat, ask questions if you want to. And so to kind of start it off, I thought we could answer the question. And Dan, I'll let you go first if you want to, and for all of you to go ahead and feel free to put your answers in the chat. But so as your faith has shifted over time, how have your ideas about what it means? Can we have Jello shots during this? shot.
That's, I mean, what else is communion? So
But
yeah,
Jello shot communion.
so I'm just saying,
Man,
pass those little cups around.
we'd make a lot of people really mad with that. Is that like, I feel like that might be blasphemous. I don't know. Blasphemy, heresy,
That's right.
Whatever. Okay, so anyway, how have your ideas about what it means to know God's will, how has that shifted over time? So maybe like kind of how did you used to see that, and then how do you see that now?
Yeah. For me, I think growing up, I kind of felt that same, like God's will, like knowing God's will was kind of the ultimate, like, because where you wanted to be was in the center of God's will. And I don't think
Right.
any of those things are inherently that desire to align with God's ways, or like, I don't think any of those things are wrong. But for me, it was, and I think in reality, I think it often looked more like not what's the type of person you should become,
Mhm.
and that being a part of God's will, and it more being about, for lack of a better words, knowing the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what job should I do?
Your calling,
What vocation should I
yeah.
have? Yeah, it was always kind of hinged around that. And then also leading college ministries for, how many years did we do that? You know,
Long
like
time. Mhm.
a long time. That was a question that would constantly come up. And
Mhm.
I think even like like when I started really kind of deconstructing or thinking differently about faith, even this shifted for me real early on, because there were times that I was confident that I knew God's will,
Mhm.
and I was just wrong, and I was honest enough to go, oh, whoops, wrong on that one. Like, I vividly remember I was in my early 20s, was on a Bible retreat when we were in Bible school, and I was convinced that God told me I was going to be an actor, like Hollywood actor sort of thing. It was what I thought I was going to. And I mean, there were confirmations. I was like, God, it was, imagine like your typical like high school kid receiving a word, it was
Right.
like that. I was sure of it.
Right.
Well, I was wrong. You know what I mean? Clearly I was wrong. So
hold on. Are you going to skip over the part where you actually had headshots?
oh
done?
yeah. And I'm sure they're somewhere, but headshots were
Yeah.
taken.
We have them. If anyone wants to
Yes.
see them.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, go
Quite
on.
embarrassing. I believe one tank top in a locker room on a locker.
There's some where he's shirtless. Oh, you
This
guys.
is
It's gold material. Anyways,
all
I
true.
digress.
But like, and I was able to look at that and go, okay, in that moment, I was confident and I was wrong, So I don't think, and I think where it kind of got over time, and as I saw that with countless people in the church, knowing God's will, these, prophesying over people, AKA prophesying, and like learning to go, okay, so I was wrong on that. So then what is it? And less of a gravitational pull towards, now how I'd look at it is less, finding God's will is less about knowing what the future is. And now it's more a journey. It's being
Yeah.
the kind of person that Christ was on the journey of life that we're on. And that can look like different things at different times, whether we're in school or at one job or at another, whether we're, raising a family or not, and have, whether our friends are central to our life at that stage of life, or it's more family or whatever. Like the end destination matters way less than who you are on that journey.
Hmm.
And I think that started to shift for me, because the same things that all of us kind of experience. And I just remembered this, I wanted to pull this up, and it kind of speaks to what, Cal, you were just talking about. But as an example of the ways that this is still communicated, there's a group of pastors that we kind of text each other, real close friends. And one of them sent this over because this is so true to the kinds of things that we would hear. But it's this post from this, I don't know if he's a pastor.
You don't have to say, yeah.
I'm not, or just a Christian. but he makes a comment about, he's talking about Saul, and Saul went from killing Christians to, you know, being one of the leaders of the early church,
Becoming Paul.
becoming
Yeah.
Paul, and talking about that. And then in his post, he says, in other words, work hard at becoming weak and less of who you are. Stop listening to your heart. Close down your gut reactions. Don't listen to you.
Wow.
If you do, you may think killing Christians is God's will. Instead, listen to the still small voice of the Holy Spirit, confirm what you hear with the word of God, and then get into fearless action. And like those lines about, and it's really blatant in this, it's just straightforward. But those were the types of ideas and messages that were communicated: to close down your gut reactions, to stop listening to your heart. Don't listen to you. And the fear is, because then you'll go killing Christians as if that was the thing, that Paul just had this gut reaction to murder people, and not his religious upbringing influencing him to make choices that would be antithetical to the cause of Christ.
Right.
And really what he was listening to were those religious voices saying who should be persecuted, who should be in, who is out, and listening to that. I feel like any human, to do that, has to deny some part of humanity within themselves.
Yeah.
That is saying no to your heart. That's saying no to your
that's
gut
really good.
reactions that would be like, no, I'm not going to lock this person up for their beliefs. But there's something that has to override that. And in my opinion, that's the danger of churches and pastors communicating, don't listen to your heart, because it perpetuates violence against minorities.
Yeah.
It perpetuates violence against
100%.
ourselves, and kind of being critical against the ways that God has made us.
Yeah.
So to me, that's one of the most insidious things about this message of don't trust your heart, don't listen to. It's exactly what Sabrina experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. Sabrina also said what's interesting also is that in biblical times, it wasn't the heart that was seen as the center of feelings, it was the gut. That is
Yes.
really interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. I think too, I know for me, there was such an emphasis on God's will, but there was also an emphasis on, if you're not careful, you're going to miss God's will and you're going to miss this plan that God has for you. And so it was like, well, gosh, I don't want to miss that. And so I was so hyper vigilant about trying to determine what God's will was. And I was so terrified of, it was almost like I was terrified to make any decisions, because what if I make the wrong one and I end up outside of God's will? And then that was like, if you weren't in God's will, you weren't protected, you weren't favored, you were more susceptible to be deceived and to sin and to do all these terrible things. And so it was like, that is a lot of pressure for a teenage brain to have to process and to carry around. And then that followed me into my young adulthood, where it was like there was this constant striving for figuring out this magic formula that would place me in the center of God's will. But then it was like, but how the heck am I supposed to know what that is? And so then it just was like this vicious cycle of like fear and like being afraid to even move. You know, it was like I didn't know. And gosh, I feel like part of it is a personality thing, but I even to this day struggle with making decisions, because it's like, what if I make the wrong one? What if I do the thing that's this time it's going to place me outside of what God really wants for me, you know? And now I see it like you do, as far as I don't think there's like this one ultimate plan that's up to us to figure out what that plan is, even though we're not audibly hearing God speak, you know, and so now I've shifted to where I feel like it's way more about the person you're becoming and how you care for your neighbor along the way, and the way that we work for justice and mercy and love in this world. That to me has way more to do with following the ways of Christ than this ultimate plan that I'm somehow supposed to figure out what that is for my life, you know? I
also remember, do you ever remember hearing, and I don't know if you guys got this too, but in talking about this, like different things are kind of coming back to me. And in Romans 12, there's a verse, I looked it up. It says, it's the do not be conformed to this world. But the second part of it says, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Yes.
And there was a lot of pastors who would teach that as as in those are three different things. There's God's good will, there's God's pleasing will, and then there's God's perfect will.
Yes. 100%.
And Christians can be, you can have God's good will. Is that what you want? Or do you want God's perfect will for your life? And listen, I can go there. So if you want a message along those lines, I can give you one.
Yes.
But like that idea and that the pressure and the anxiety that creates of like, I'm just, I'm settling for God's goodwill. I want, and the kind of pressure that puts to, in reality, here we are, like, if God is God, our ability to like even comprehend what God is, it would be impossible for us to fully know that, so it just breeds all kinds of anxiety and stress and fear and things that are not fruit of the Spirit of God.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I absolutely. It's so funny because I actually thought of that this morning about remembering a sermon that was preached where it was talking about you can settle for God's good or you can do this and it's pleasing, but it's not perfect. And so it was like, then even more so, it was like, well, then how do you know like the path to each of those? Like it just was so much pressure. And so, for sure. Okay. This question, like this can be a good one because I have so many thoughts about this and I know you're going to too, but, why is it that you think, because even like that post from that social media post that Dan just read from, that person is very much immersed in the evangelical world. I know this person went to like an evangelical Bible school. I don't know if they have pastored, but they're like very much immersed in that world. So why is it that you think that most, and I think I can say most here and not be over dramatic. I think most evangelical spaces teach people not to trust themselves.
Control. I mean, if I'm going to be honest, that to me, that's the fruit of it. It's absolutely, it is, because fear is a powerful motivator.
Yeah.
When you get someone when you communicate directly or indirectly, don't trust yourself, don't trust your heart, don't trust your gut, trust God. Well, who's God's mouthpiece in that moment?
That leader.
Yeah. Right? Like they're the ones that are orating for God, who are speaking on behalf of God. Now they'll say, go to the Bible, but then they'll also say, but listen, there's heretics out there. You got to be careful. You insinuating anyone who communicates anything differently than me about this, they're a heretic. Yep. They're a false prophet. They're a false teacher. Don't listen to them. Therefore, who do we listen to? Me. So I can articulate what it is, what I think you should do. And sometimes I think that can be nefarious. And I think sometimes it can be, they're not trying to do anything evil and wrong. It's just what they were handed. Right. But the system that they're perpetuating is causing harm, and is, even if it's inadvertent, is still ending up with control. That's ultimately what it boils down to. And we could dress it up with a million things, but ultimately it's about control and it's about power. Yeah. And that, in my opinion.
Yeah. 100% agree. I mean, people, especially people within the church and again, I agree. I think there are a lot of spaces where it is about, where like where it is more nefarious, and I think even so, as I've kind of opened up my eyes to a lot of things happening, especially in larger mega churches in America and in the whole evangelical movement, like my eyes have been opened and I'm like, oh my goodness, this, like, what is the underlying current of this is the fruit is so rotten. But I think for instance, for us, as because we've shifted. I mean, when we started Icon, we did not hold the same views that we hold now about God, about the world, about ourselves. And so I think a lot of it is, it's like you so badly as a leader, you are taught that, like, you have to show people the right way to go. And so I do think, and we all took these scriptures of like, our heart is deceitful and wicked above all things. Like, I think in Christianity, in white evangelical Christianity especially, there's this underlying theme of like, we are just filthy, rotten, terrible, horrible sinners at our core, and we deserve hell, we deserve death, we deserve all of those things, but Jesus intervened, so now we have this like underlying idea about ourselves being terrible, horrible, like just awful people. And so yeah, there's just this belief we have that we cannot be trusted. And I think that when you have people within the church who don't trust themselves, they're more likely to look outward at ex-pastor or faith leader or small group leader or whatever and trust what they say. It's like, well, I can't trust myself, and this person's the pastor, so therefore they most likely know the Bible better than I do. They can hear God better than I can. So I'm going to then listen to what they say about my life and make decisions based on their opinions. But ultimately I agree. It's about controlling people's behavior. It's about keeping people in line, keeping people believing the same things and not questioning. And so, yeah, it can get just really ugly really fast.
And at the same time, because, and I can say this because, you know, you see it in Stories That Break, and also we've lived it and been up close to leaders who also teach that it's like they're communicating that, and they're communicating that, like, you know, being in God's perfect will and can't do this and can't do this. But then also will make choices that we've been on staff at churches that talk about, hey, we don't want to give off the impression of, you know, I'm trying to think the language that they would use, but like, let's say around drinking, and they would say, you know, hey, pastors on staff, you know, we trust your judgment that you can drink moderation and all those sorts of things, but we want you to be a good influence in our community. So you can't do it while you're here. When you're on vacation, have a beer, have a glass of wine, go for it. But while you're here, so it perpetuates this belief that from the pews, you're looking at the leaders going, well, I can't live like that. I can't, you know, look at how perfect they are. Look at everything they know. Look at everything, because you're taught that they're supposed to be, these are things they talk about in Bible school, like this pastoral mystique that you should give, and you shouldn't get too close to, you know, the people in the church. They should look up. So it's also creating this idea that's not real. Yeah. You know, it's causing people to want to aspire to something that isn't even real. And when they're saying things like, oh, again, with alcohol, hey, drive into this other town if you want to buy, you know, a 6-pack for the big game, you know, and then you can bring it back so no one sees you going in. And it's like, oh my God, like that happens way more than you realize, you know, and it's way more prevalent. And I think it's why, and that was something that I think we got sick of early on from the beginning. Even when we were starting Icon, there were leaders that would tell us like, hey, are you sure? Like, when we first met in a bar, that was our first venue, you know what I mean? People would make comments about that. And for us, we've tried, and I'm sure failed at to be as transparent and as honest, and like what you see is what you get. So I don't know. I think there are things also that happen that just perpetuate this. And I think it's also front of mind because we recently watched a documentary that highlighted some of the ways that this can not only just be inadvertent, but be nefarious and abusive.
Yes.
There's a couple documentaries.
What's the one? It's called, it's the one about Jerry Falwell.
Yeah, go ahead and post in the chat if anyone knows. Liberty University and Jerry Falwell. There was just a documentary on that. And then there's also one on Hillsong that's on Disney. Both of those go to show you oftentimes that what is presented on the outside is not always what is reality, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, Stephen, I think we can all sympathize with them because we were all there. Once you step down from the high horse, you see how wicked and controlling American Christianity has become. Yeah. Sabrina, when you can't trust your own judgment, but only the teachings of the leader, that sounds kind of cultish. Yeah. 100%. You know, when we get to this point where it's like, and I can remember when I started breaking free from that and realizing, wait a minute, like if I'm made in the image of God, like if God created humans and called us good, like that's the first thing God said about us, not these humans are, look at how deceitful and wicked they are, or look how sinful they are. Like when God first created us, God called us good. So we are inherently created in that image of God that is good. Now, are humans capable of doing really terrible, horrible things? Absolutely. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think that when I started making that shift of like actually seeing myself as made in the image of God, of yes, capable of causing harm, but also capable of love and goodness and working for justice, and realizing like, oh, like I think I can try, like if I'm in a situation and I feel, and like my gut is just telling me something is off here, like something does not feel right about this belief that I hold, or this thing that this religious leader is teaching. And there's just something that doesn't sit right in my heart and in my gut. When I started listening to that, it was when and exploring those things, that's when I realized how many beliefs that I held that were actually causing harm, both to myself, but even more so to my neighbor and to marginalized people. And so I think like breaking free from those confines of like feeling like I can't trust myself, and to where I now listen to my body and listen to my gut. And does that mean that I'm always going to be right? No, but I think also it's removed that fear of being wrong.
Mm.
Like for you, when you were in high school and thought you were going to be an actor in Hollywood, we kind of laugh about it, you know, and you're like, I was wrong. But also like you were 17 and like trying to figure things out. And so it's like, well, sure. Like there's going to be times where we think we're going to do something, or we have a desire to do something, and then it doesn't pan out. And like, that's just part of the journey. It's like, oh, okay. So that wasn't it.
Yeah.
I thought that was it, and it wasn't.
Well, and to make it more real life, I also thought I'd be pastoring a church for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I won't. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not like, oh, that's cute, 17-year-old Dan. That's like, no, adult Dan had to figure out at 40 years old, hey, you've spent 20 plus years of your life doing this one thing. Mm-hmm. Now that chapter is closed. Like, well, now what? You know what I mean? Now determining God's will now, like, what do you do with that? Right. You know? So it's not just, you're right. It's not just, oh, you know, when we were kids, it's, no, this is real.
It's real life.
We have to face this on the regular.
Yeah. And I remember when you decided to resign, some well-meaning pastor friends, you know, said to you, well, for now, like, you're done for now. And they bring up the whole, like, what's that script? What is the thing about God's calling is irrevocable?
Oh, the plans of call of God.
The call of God is irrevocable, which a lot of people have taken to mean if you feel like you're supposed to do vocational ministry with your life, that's forever. Like, and so it was just, and I know they were well-meaning, and I think they were trying, but like, and you were like, no, I'm telling you that this season is done. Like, I'm done. And it was like, well, okay.
And I was even trying to be honest. I'm like, listen, I can't say I know for a fact. Cause again, I've given up on that. I've given up on like knowing things. You know what I mean? It's like, I really don't think so. But when what's being communicated is, you know, almost like, that's cute, but we know you'll go back into ministry.
It's so paternalistic. It's like, no, listen, I'm telling you, I know what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking better than anyone else does, you know? And so, Stephen said it's really scary to step away from that comfort, because there's comfort in control, 100%. Mm-hmm. There's comfort in certainty, you know? And I mean,
even a false sense of certainty, there's comfort in that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, 100%. And am a recovering control freak. I mean, I like to be in control. I don't like things to feel out of my control, but at the end of the day, no matter how much we tell ourselves we're in control, we are not. Like we have a limited amount of control over what happens to us, what we experience, our circumstances. We have some control over that. I mean, there are certain choices we can make and decisions we can make that can have certain outcomes that we can definitely sort of control. But at the end of the day, like, we are human beings floating around on this giant blue rock in the middle of space we are not immortal, and we are not immune to the happenings around us. And we ultimately don't have control over a lot of what happens to us, you know, and what kind of the outcomes of things are. So it's like, really, it's so scary to step away, but I think it's also really freeing to let go of that control. And can we just talk about how that idea of like, sort of not being able to trust yourself, it also makes us want to try to control other people, because like, it's like, well, what if, like, when we look at it that way, that like there's only one right way to live, one right way to believe, when people go outside of that, it makes us want to try to control them, control their beliefs, control their behavior. Gosh, as a parent, like, oh, that's so real, where it's like you want to control the things your kids do because you want to make sure that they're making decisions that, you know, but in reality, like, the best thing I think we can do for people we love, our children, our friends, people around us, like, is to let people kind of figure it out and sometimes make decisions that have consequences that might be kind of hard, but that's how we learn and grow and change and shift, and failure is good, you know, even though we don't like to think that. And so, yeah, I think letting go of that control, you do have to let go of comfort because it does feel disorienting, but in the long run, I feel like it's more freeing to kind of step outside of that.
I love what Sabrina put. She said, Father Richard Rohr says that doubt isn't the opposite of faith, certitude is. And I couldn't agree more. There's a really good book called The Sin of Certainty by Dr. Pete Enns, and it's phenomenal.
So good.
And it talks about that. It talks about certainty. And I think you can take that further, not to be too much of a tangent, but I think oftentimes in the church, we kind of worship certainty.
Yeah.
We have an idea of God, that we almost idolatrize, you know, or that's what I'm looking for. Idolatry. We make an idol. Like that we, instead of having humility and saying, listen, I don't know, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have. And ultimately, like you're saying, we don't do those things. We don't control the people we love, because love doesn't control.
Right.
So I'm not going to try to, you know, lock down these people in my life, my friends, my family, my children, I'm going to allow them to be free. And I'm not going to say, I know this is what they need to do with their lives, because ultimately I don't know.
Right.
I think I do, and I'm doing the best I can, but I got to give them that same space to do the best they can with what they have as well.
For sure. Stephen, somewhat off topic, has deconstructing your faith helped you in parenting? Oh my gosh. I feel like that would be like a whole conversation in of itself. I mean, the short answer is like, it has made me so much like a much better parent. Yeah. I think all those same reasons of like letting go of control, letting my kids be who they are, trusting them when they tell me what they're thinking or what they're feeling or who they are, believing them, letting them figure out things like sexuality and gender identity, and like letting them wrestle with that on their own, and being a safe space where they can ask those questions and figure those things out, you know. And another thing that I think that we've really tried to do too with our kids is letting them figure out what faith looks like for them. You know, we have our kids land all over the place, all over the map when it comes to faith. You know, we have, you know, one of our kids is very passionate about their faith and is a Christian and is very faithfully dedicated to being a follower of Jesus.
Serves regularly, Sunday mornings,
like attends church with one of their friends and goes to their youth group with their friend. And then we have you know, another kid who does not identify as a Christian. We have another one who is still kind of figuring it out and just wants to be able to doesn't really place any labels on themselves, but is just sort of wanting to take their time and figuring out if that's something they actually want to do, which is really cool to me, that a kid would say, I don't want to make any permanent decisions right now because I don't know enough. And I remember having that conversation being like, wow, that's like, wow. And like letting go of the reins of control to allow these kids to be able to figure all that out. Like,
and can you imagine for a moment being the kid on the other side of that?
Yeah.
The difference between what many of us were handed and what many of us experienced versus what they will experience, where if I would have come to a leader, to a to someone with those sorts of things, it would have been, okay, well then read this, and the Bible says this, and did you know that? And it's like, so as a child, what you're hearing is, oh, so if I want to be included, have belonging, a part of, then I have to believe these things, then I need to fall in line. And again, that pressure that we begin to feel versus, wow, that's really interesting. That's really awesome that you're taking your time to really think about what you believe, and really like, that's so awesome. If you ever have questions, come to me. That child actually will come to you when you do that,
and
as opposed to, hey, here's what to think. It's like, oh, if I've got big questions about that, I'm not going to, go to them because I know that's out of bounds, So yes, a million times over. Yes.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously, and there's been a lot of things I've gotten wrong, like where I've kind of went back to those old ways of fear and control. And I've had to go back and look at my kids and be like, I really screwed up, and I'm really sorry, and I hurt you, and that's not okay. And I'm not looking for absolution. I'm not, I'm just telling you, I am sorry that I responded in that way. And I explained to them that was coming from a place of fear and control, not from a place of love. And so there's a lot that I've like, it's hard because those like old ways of fear and control, those run deep, man. Like that, like being afraid to move or to make decisions, or, that like it's rooted so deep. And so, but for sure that has 100%, I think. And I love it that I can look at my kids and say, I trust you. I trust, like, I want you, like we've started, especially with with our youngest, have been teaching him. And really I tell all my kids this, but have just been like, what do you feel in your body right now? Like when you think about this thing, what are you feeling in your body? I want you to listen to your body. If your body is telling you that you're tired, I want you to listen to it. If your body is saying like that you need to break from this, I want you to listen to that. And so I think it's helped as I've been learning how to be more embodied and to trust myself, to know that like, it's okay for me to listen to my gut and to follow what my heart is telling me. And I want to also pass that on to my kids. And so,
and can I just 1 second unpack, like from, because what I think what my brain does a lot is, because I grew up in those Christian spaces, is it's like, so you just want to listen to yourself, but Christians will do the same thing. They'll just tack God language onto it. So it's 100%. Like, okay, couldn't you also make the argument that listening to your body is allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to you, and allowing the Spirit to call the balls and strikes, to give us a peace that passes understanding, that, all of those things, these are like Jesus things. You know what I mean? I think Christians have just so demonized them in many ways that it feels like, ooh, you're just trusting yourself. You're just, and again, it goes back to that control, because if every Christian really can let the Spirit of God speak to them, if every really can trust what is innate in them, what the way that God created every single one of us, if we can listen to that still small voice, if you will, man, then that pastor loses that control. Right. So that's why that's kind of weaponized and used against. So I just, anytime I hear even myself saying these things, I hear the Christian response back, well, there you go, blah, blah, blah. And I always want to call that out, even in my own brain, to be like, no, that's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because that constant out here, the rebuttal all the time is that scripture, that Jeremiah 17:9. Well, you can't trust yourself because the heart is deceitful and wicked above all else.
Mhm.
And it's like, but why is it that you like what you think that you know the right thing?
Mhm.
Where did you hear that from?
Mhm.
Like, so you're saying, so basically you're allowed to trust what you believe you're hearing because you're coloring it with God language. But if I say I'm trusting my gut on this, or I'm trusting myself, which to me, I think it's because I no longer see everything as separate. I feel like faith should be embodied. It should be something that we carry within our actual physical bodies. And so to me, like, and this, I want to talk about this a little bit too, because this other question is, what are some factors that you consider when making decisions about your life? I think what I'm not saying, what we're not saying is that just do whatever you want, do whatever feels good, do whatever, like, because obviously there has to be some plumb lines for us. If we're wanting to work for justice, to love our neighbor, for everyone to be whole and free, and for there to be shalom. Like, if we desire liberation for all, then what we're not saying is that means that you can do whatever the heck you want to do, no matter who it hurts,
Mhm.
no matter, what kind of destruction you leave in your path, that you just do whatever you want to do. Like, I get it that there needs to be some sort of, as we're making decisions about how we're going to live and about our life, there have to be some things that we factor in there about, as far as like, is it going to cause harm? Is this something that is good for me, that's going to lead me more towards wholeness and liberation? So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. And Sabrina said, is there some magic formula to know when it's the spirit versus your feelings?
Yeah.
Like, I think I've stopped separating those things so much, and have
Mhm.
learned that, no, I think that if I am feeling in my gut that something is not right, there's and if I'm also doing my best to follow the ways of Jesus, that's probably a pretty good indicator
Mhm.
that isn't just me thinking that,
Mhm.
that like there's a reason why that isn't sitting right with me in this
Mhm.
moment, So I guess, Dan, what are some things, like, when you're making decisions, or when you're like, if there's something that you want to do, are there any factors at play there to know, like, is this decision the best thing for me in this moment?
Yeah, I think for me, yes, to a degree, but whereas you are kind of a classic overthinker, I would say I'm probably a classic underthinker. So I also don't I don't overanalyze it. Like, I don't know. I just think my ability to eventually figure it out, like, let me rephrase that. My ability to think this through from 50 different angles pre-decision and make this ultimate perfect one is not that much better than me just making a decision, and I save myself that agony. So I don't tend to overthink
Man, what's
it.
that like? To have a brain that works like that.
I know. It also can get me into trouble, though, because I make decisions a little
you can be sure you can be hasty at times.
bit impulsive.
Yeah,
yes. Sure. But I think that first filter that I pass things through is this broad, is this loving, as for me, in the context, the spiritual language I grew up speaking, the only filter I know is Christ. So for me, that's what I go to. I go, does this align with the message of Christ that came through Jesus? That's my filter. That's how I read the Bible. That's how I interact with life. And you get a really kind of brief window of that. And then there's a lot of things that are outside that scale. When I was deciding what job I was going to take, in the grand scheme of things, none of them were antithetical to loving this world, to loving people, to loving God. It wasn't like, hey, do I want to work for this, this, here we go. I was thinking of something that I really disagree with, but I don't want to start any fights, but this company that's horribly polluting our world and destroying things and is only about capitalism and making money. And okay, then no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Well, most jobs were like, do I want to work here? Do I want to work here? And then it's just, which do I want more? Like,
Yeah.
would I rather enjoy? Which would I
Yeah.
like? If neither one is really going to impact how I'm loving others and how I'm loving God, then which job do I want?
Yeah.
Like, which one's more enjoyable? Which one does
Yeah.
allow me to the freedom that I want with my life? Which one,
Mhm.
as I reference what I'll make with, the freedom that I'll have, like what do I want? And
Yeah.
and I just don't overthink it. And then I make a decision and I go for the thing that I want the most, even if it's the least likely. And I just go from there
Yeah.
and work down the list until something lands.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I think for me there are like some of those plumb lines. It's like, okay, there's some decisions that we make that are a little bit more inconsequential, but then I think there are some times when, for instance, if we're making a parenting decision
Mhm.
and there might be something that, our child wants to do that I look at and I'm like, ooh, gosh, I don't know, I don't know what I think about that. And I think some of the questions is it's like, okay, what decision is going to allow, like sometimes there'll be decisions when it comes to our kids where it's like, I know that if I make this one decision, if we do this one thing, it could potentially have a negative impact on the trust between us and that child and our relationship in the future. And so then we analyze it and it's like, okay, is there, what's the harm? Will allowing them to do this thing, what is the potential for harm to be caused, either themselves or to someone else? And I think even for myself, I look at that a lot too, is it's like, okay, is this going to harm my body? Is this going to make me feel less of who I am? Is this going to compromise some of the values that I believe in? Is this how, and I love how you brought up the job thing about, because I remember there was one kind of potential client that you were like one of your hard lines, because there was a company that Dan was working for that was a kind of a Christian-based company. And one of the hard lines was, if this company is anti-LGBTQ rights and inclusion, I am not going to take them on as a client. Or if the things that they stand for is causing harm to people, then I'm not going to work for them. So I think having those kinds of plumb lines and kind of filters that we, put things through, I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And you guys can put in the chat too. I know we're starting to get short on time. We got about 9 minutes left before it's going to cut us off, but I'd be curious to hear some of you, like if there's any kind of plumb lines for you in making decisions and deciding what you believe is best for you and for those around you. If there's anything that you kind of filter that through, we'd love for you to throw that in the chat. And then just lastly, like as you've made this shift in your life, going from believing that you can't trust yourself, another thing is like your emotions are bad, you can't trust your emotions, which is like, I'm not saying that we should always act on every emotion that we feel, or that we should always be like kind of enslaved to whatever emotion we're feeling in the moment. I have learned that emotions are information.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is a reason why we're feeling them. And so as you've kind of shifted from, believing that you can't trust yourself, that your emotions, and your body are bad and can't be trusted, making that shift to believing that those things are good and that we are made in God's image. And what has the fruit of your life been since making those shifts? What kind of fruit have you seen?
Yeah, I think a lightness in my life, like not having this weight, you know what I mean, of like constantly having to feel like, is this again, having to figure it all out. And it just life feels a little less, not challenging, but a little less complex, if you will. I don't know. It's hard to it's hard to articulate it, but it feels like more of a lightness, you know,
Yeah.
more of it's brought more joy back to life. It's, instead of the interpretive grid being like 15 things that I'm trying to like perfectly, like what's God's perfect will in this, and if this, to like, you know, I love Sabrina just put, other than the Jesus filter, our family golden rule is remember your values and be considerate of others. Yeah.
So
when
simple.
yeah, so when like those are your
It's like,
filters,
yeah.
it just gets way simpler, you know.
Yeah.
And the outcome is still loving and gracious and kind, and you have this freedom and this feeling of lightness and less anxiety
Yeah.
and, you know, less pressure to perform and
Yeah.
I don't know, things like, I don't know, love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, like
The
it just
things that are actual fruits of the spirit.
yeah, like
You
that's
know?
what it brings.
Yeah.
That's the difference that it feels.
Yeah. And I think it's been letting go of the fear of being wrong, like
Mhm.
realizing that making and it's also kind of changed my idea of what a wrong decision is. Because with some things, I'm like, there's really no wrong one. It's just which one aligns better with what you want and with your values and with who you are. But I think also it's like, and again, this goes back to our last series. I'm like letting go of this idea of like an eternal conscious torment, you know, of hell, or like letting go of all that fear-based stuff in my faith has brought me to a place where I'm not so afraid of getting it wrong now, you know, where I'm like, it's all part of the journey. And if I make a decision and decide to do something, and if a year later I'm like, ooh, I just don't know if that's really what I want to be doing, I can change it. Like I'm able to do that. And so I think just not living with the constant fear of being wrong and of missing God somehow, realizing if God really is God, then God is in all and is working always. And there's nowhere I can go and not be with God. Like God is always there, you know, something about, you know, that there's nothing that can separate us from God's love. And if God is love and nothing can separate us from that, then like we can let go. And again, I'm not saying like that we aren't mindful. I think as Christians, we need to be even more mindful about how our decisions affect others, how we're caring for the earth, how we're caring for our neighbor, how we're caring for our own selves and our own bodies. But I think we can release that fear. And if that's the underlying, like if underneath it all, genuinely what we want is we want to love people well and like work for the wholeness of all people. When that is flowing through everything we do, I don't think we have to be constantly so afraid of making a wrong choice, because I think that, again, God, and this verse also is one that has been used, I think, a lot of times out of context, but I just come back to God works all things together for good for those who love him. Like it's all part of the journey, and God is able to weave it all together to keep us on this path of wholeness and liberation and love. So
yeah, I think if anyone in that whole like trying to figure out what's next sort of phase, my only bit of advice would be pay less attention to like purpose, because again, that's a losing battle. You'll never figure it out. And pay way more attention to passion. Just what are those things you're passionate about? What are the things that you love? What are the things that you enjoy doing? What are the things that when it comes up, you light up? When someone brings up a topic you want to jump in and talk about, pay attention to that and lean into that. And I think that is a lot better North Star than some amorphous, ambiguous like purpose that you're going to struggle to figure it out.
Because a lot of times that purpose would be like, I always thought God was going to tell me to do things that I hated. Like that like I wasn't allowed to be happy or to have that be anything that brought pleasure, anything that brought joy, anything that brought a sense of happiness. Like those things were to be feared. That meant like, cause it's not, you know, it's not about me, it's about what God wants. And so I was always afraid God was going to tell me to do something I hated. And I now know, I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, yeah, there's things we have to do that are hard, but like, I don't know. I think if the fruit of our life is love, joy, peace, you know, all of those things, I think that's a pretty good plumb line. So, and it's going to cut us off here in about a minute and a half.
And we're on a delay, so about a minute.
In about a minute. So I put the link to that article if anybody wants to read it about Jeremiah 17:9 in the chat. And yeah, thank you guys so much for your engagement, for sharing your perspectives and your thoughts. It's been a really, really great conversation. And I hope that you guys all have a fantastic week. And we will see you next week, both online and in person. So have a great week, everybody.